So the Democratic Alliance is calling for Police Minister Senzo Mchunu to appear before Parliament over 5.4 million missing and closed dockets since 2018. A majority of these stolen dockets from police stations were open cases of rape and sexual assault. Research associate of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at the Wits University, Vetten, joins us now to discuss these worrying stats. Lisa, good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, these numbers are startling, right? 5.4 million missing and closed dockets. I mean, you see the statement that's been put forward by the Democratic Alliance. What's your immediate thought?
On one level, the figures that they're giving for rape, which is about 62,000 over 5 years, are quite consistent with the pattern we've seen for at least the last decade or so in terms of rape investigations. I mean, having done docket analysis myself, our last study looks at 2012. We found that the police arrested in maybe just under 60% of cases, and the 40% of cases remained unsolved. So the figures that the DA are giving suggest and confirm a long-standing pattern, I think, where the police are not able to, in particular, deal with the strange rape cases. They're not able to identify suspects.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to just have a differentiation here, because there's certainly the issue of closed dockets, and then there's the issue of missing dockets. And I think that where rape and sexual assault are concerned, it seems that dockets are being stolen, Lisa.
Yes. Looking at the information that was made available by the DA, this seems to be particularly the case in Limpopo. And that the fact that they go missing would strongly suggest, unfortunately, corruption or being paid off, which is something I think many complainants have alleged for a long time without perhaps that attracting the attention that it should. It's been a long-standing problem, I think, within the criminal justice generally, and the fact that it persists quite obviously shows we're not doing what needs to be done in order to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, because the question was brought forward to the police minister, and in his reply he said 68.75% of stolen dockets from police stations were open cases of rape and sexual assault. I mean, that's very close to 70%. Very, very concerning. Just want to look at more of this data. So among the unresolved cases from 2018 to 2019 were attempted murder at 40,000 cases, assault with grievous bodily harm, 141,000 dockets that have just been unsolved. Aggravated robbery, 250,000, 61,000 for sexual assault, of course, and we've touched on those. What does this do then for the trickle-down effect of seeing some sort of justice for the victims of gender-based violence? And the story also that we're telling to the world, Lisa, I mean, the people look at South Africa and they say, oh, it's the rape capital of the world, and yet 70% of rape case dockets are just disappearing.
I mean, what it is telling us, I think we're seeing within vigilantism, for example, some of what these low investigation rates are yielding. People lose faith in the criminal justice system. They either stop reporting altogether, or they turn to self-help or other remedies in order to address their problems. And so, when you stand up and talk about the rule of law, at the same time you're presenting these kinds of figures, you're completely undermining what you're trying to accomplish. Not only that, you allow crime to persist in some ways, because a fair number of those who perhaps were not fined may well be repeat offenders. And if they are never caught and never apprehended, they will obviously continue to repeat their behavior and continue to contribute to the statistics. And of course, I think other people looking at this tend to start to assume that we're in a somewhat lawless context. It's a free-for-all. I don't really need to worry about consequences. So there's a whole range of knock-on effects in terms of not just denying justice to those who are harmed the first time, but perhaps further contributing to an increase in crime going forward.
Right. Yeah, because close to 70% of rape dockets getting stolen it speaks, though, to a systemic issue. It speaks to something that is a long-standing, that almost publicly known in some communities, one would imagine. But the Democratic Alliance here calling on the minister, the police minister, as well as the National Police Commissioner to launch, what is it, a full-scale investigation into missing and stolen dockets. I mean, what could that yield any sort of results?
It is important. It does need to. It seems to be worse in some areas than in other areas. So I think one would need to look at where is this happening, because it doesn't appear to be generalized. It appears to be quite specific. So I think if one investigates those stations where it is very high, then one can actually do something about it. And one would hope they have that level of data to be able to identify exactly where the problems are.
Yeah.
But the other side of the problem is really the detective services. The police need to put so much more energy and resources into employing more detectives and ensuring that they have good working conditions and are adequately skilled and capacitated to do their work.
Yeah, I mean, this is what the Democratic Alliance has put forward. All this data that we've been talking about essentially means that 32 victims of rape and sexual assault rather, lose a chance at obtaining justice each and every day. So that's 32 rapes a day that go unsolved with no real justice. You've got to think about the impact on those 32 lives, and then no answers, no accountability for what happens to them. Who do you think then you could task with taking this issue forward? And I mean, we certainly talk about civil society, and the conversation takes place in August. There's a sense that, well, it might just very well die down again and then kickstart again in December or November when we get around 16 days of activism. But, you know, how do we keep particularly law enforcement accountable on this matter?
This is a truly systemic problem. The research we did in 2012 was giving exactly the same figures as we are seeing now.
Sure.
So this is a deeply entrenched problem. And I think the problems in the detective services, people started calling attention to them back in the early 2000s. So I think what we need to see from the police, and they've done this before, but they need to do it again, is to give an updated report on the state of detective services. A couple of years ago, for example, in Parliament, they revealed that 25% of detectives had never been on a training course around investigations, for example. So it's the question both of, do we have sufficient numbers? And already earlier this year, we talked about an insufficient budget to the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit, which will obviously have impacts on the number of detectives who can be employed. So it's a problem that we need to look at in relation to both the budget. Does it allow us to employ sufficient detectives? Then do the detectives have the necessary skills and training? And what else do they need in order to be able to equip them to do better? Because the particular problems are really in relation to stranger rape. If I look at the research we did, you know, it's easier to find somebody who's known because you have a name and an address. But in South Africa, when it comes to adults, at least 40% of rapes are committed by strangers. And you need different investigation skills, and you need a lot of human resources to be able to follow up detectives, to follow up those cases. And when you are short-staffed, what is a normal human behavior is to look at your dockets and decide which ones am I going to have the most success on, and put all your energies into those, which will mean that the stranger rapes continue to fall by the wayside because they are so difficult.
Just lastly, I mean, you talk about human resources obviously being necessary and the training really important for us to protect the victim and ensure that, you know, those dockets are protected, the investigations are done. But you also need physical resources. So let's talk a little bit about where we are right now and your understanding on availability of rape kits. I mean, a few years ago, there was a massive discussion around a shortage of rape kits in our police stations. So when a victim arrives, they simply don't have the resources to help them. Has that been resolved?
It would appear that the forensic kits, the crisis that we had in about 2018, 2019 has been addressed. But there's another perennial resource problem, and that is around cars. Very often the police don't have sufficient cars, and this obviously becomes much more of a problem in rural areas in order to be able to go out, speak to complainants, be able to do follow-up investigations, to go to different parts of an area in order to speak to other witnesses or potential sources of information. And that's another perennial problem which has not been addressed.
Yeah. Lisa, we could talk for a very long time, and I think that this is a really important discussion, but we do appreciate your time and hope that this does reach the ears of our top law enforcement leaders as well, who hopefully will be able to give us some time to talk to us about how we're losing these dockets when women are, you know, struggling with this issue of gender-based violence in the country. Lisa Vetten is, of course, research associate for the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University.